Last week we looked at how to get a account to use DaVinci Resolve as a personal or creator, which gives you full features for 1 year at a time. This week we're going to look at the common features you'll use to create most shapes. And in the example I'm showing you here, we've used extrudes, cuts, holes, revolves, offset planes, fillets, chamfers, all the common things you're going to need from your day-to-day designing. Once we've done that, we'll create a lid that will fit and show you how dynamically all of the parts can change with a simple measurement change. Now, I personally like to work with my background not being black, because when you haven't colored your objects, they tend to get lost that you can't see them clearly. So if we go clicking at the bottom here where we've got the little computer monitor, environment, photo booth or infinity pool. So that one's pretty harsh on the eye, that's infinity pool. Photo booth, it's also pretty harsh actually, but as we zoom out, that's using the center scroll wheel, just zooming in and out. It's easy to see what you're doing. So just choose an environment that works for your particular comfort of your eyes. Next, we're just going to look at some of the different areas in the layout. So up the top here, this is my project. If I had more than one project open, I'd get more tabs. Down here, we have the different areas that we're working on. Now, assume that I've only got this box here. This is actually a component, but yours won't be like that to start with. But within there, you'll have sketches as the first thing we'll be doing. You'll have bodies, which in this case I have one body, which is this whole solid object. You'll have origins, so you've got different planes that you can work from. And then we have the lines for the X, Y, and Z, and a center point. So we'll cover more of them as we go through. This design bar up here, we will spend most of our, in fact, we'll spend all of our time in this for this video, but there are other areas in there that you may wish to look at later on. Render is an interesting one to have some fun with. All right, create is where we create our initial drawings and then we extrude them to create raised surfaces. So we'll look at all these different features underneath here. Well, not all of them, but a lot of them as we go through. Modify, we'll again look at a few of these. So we'll look at fillet, chamfer, and if you hover over these, it will give you more information about it. So you can have a quick read on what it's actually going to do for you. Assemble, I'll have a very brief look at that at the end to do with how we created a box and a lid and assembled them together. We'll look at construction planes. So these are similar to these planes like we had before. We saw down the side here. We've got these construction planes. The inspect is literally a ruler where I can measure a distance between points, and it will tell me the distance if there's an angle involved. So we've got 32 mil. Section 1, which is across there, is 29 mil, and the section 2 is also 29 mil, so we can quickly get detail about sizing of objects. Insert we're not going to touch on at the moment, and the select tool we're just going to leave as the default one. Down the bottom here, this will initially be empty, but this is our timeline. So I can actually click on the end and progressively go back, and you'll see the further back I go, the less detail this box will have. So there I must be doing the lid, I think. There we go. So we're back to the base of the box. So you can go back in time and see what you've done and take it to a certain point and change things from that point. You can step through and see the different build-ups, how we've done them. We're going to create a brand new design here, which yours is probably already on the blank screen, but by clicking this button, a new design, you'll notice there's also electronics and a few other things in there. but we'll just work with the 3D modeling. So you'll come up with a very empty tree compared to what we just had. The bottom is now empty. And what I'm going to do is create a folder in this list for this particular design. So we will call this Demo Box 1. Once we've got our base platform set up, we'll go and we need to create a sketch. So everything we do starts off as a sketch. So I'm going to click that, and you'll see what it does is it presents me with these three shaded areas, which are the axis that we were looking at before. So if I expand this out, you'll see it does the same thing. I typically like to draw on the XY axis. So that's, if we're looking from the top down, that's the straight into it view if you're looking down on it. So I've just clicked on that plane and it's giving me this view here ready to draw. And you'll notice across the top, this toolbar will have now changed. So I'm going to be jumping between these two drawings just to take you where we want to go. So going back in my timeline, I'll take you right back to the first sketch, which will look like this. And what we're trying to end up with is the base of the box. Going back to my drawing, I'll choose this 2-point rectangle, and over here we have where we can set all of the different features of our tools. And even though I've chosen rectangle, I have other choices: 3-point rectangle, center rectangle. So if I was to draw a 2-point rectangle, I'll just do it randomly. It's top corner, and I'll just hover there for a moment, and you'll see that we have dimensions. So if I hit my tab key, I can toggle between those dimensions and type them in. So I could type 60 and 35, and if I hit enter at this point, that box would be set in that position. You see the padlocks indicate that it's going to be locked into that position. But I'll hit the escape key, which will take us out of that, because I'm going to do a different type of box. I'm going to choose the center rectangle, and I'm going to click on the center of my drawing. And then when I draw it out, and if I type in 60 tab 35 and hit enter, what you'll see is a box that is constrained to the center point of the diagram. Now, it's good to work from that center point because often we'll be mirroring left, rights and things like that. So having these center lines, if I just turn on these axes, you can't clearly see them, but you've got my X there, my Y there, and the Z will come straight up out the page at me. But we can use them when we're trying to duplicate things from the left to the right and the top to the bottom. So that's all we need to do at this stage. Difference in a dotted line is that is called a construction line, and a solid line is one that is part of our actual drawing. So I'm just going to go finish sketch, which we can click up here or down here. And we now just have a box on the screen. So the next step is to give that box some depth. So this is my extrude tool. It allows us to either pull out some depth in a surface or we can cut into a surface. In this case, we're going to pull out. So by default, it's selected the one area that we had, but in some drawings there may be more than one, so you can choose to click on and off of the bits that you actually do want to select. We're going to down here type in a depth of 3 for 3 millimeters, and if I just click OK at that, and using my shift and my rotate, you can now see that I have a flat base. But I want to undo that and show you some more detail of other options. So there you can again see my box on different angles, my flat plane. So we're going from a 2-dimensional surface and we're making a 3-dimensional surface using extrude. So instead of typing in here, I can also grab this arrow and pull it, or pull it downward, and you'll get the negative. So depending on your zoom level that you're on, you can also control quite accurately what that will be. So there's my 3mm. In some situations, we may want to do it above and below the line, so from a center line, or you may want it to have different heights and depths and things. We may cover that as we go through. You can tell it to be a specific distance, which is one of the more common we use, but you may also have a reason to make it go to the depth of another object in your drawing as it gets more detailed. Again, that may get covered as we go through. And down here, new body, because this is our first part of the drawing, it will always be a new body. And a body basically means, if I go back to the other drawing and go back up in my timeline, typically a body is one solid part. Doesn't always have to be, but this, if we're talking a 3D print, is a complete solid part. If it was for laser cutting, we may do it as multiple parts, in which case we might create multiple bodies. The next step, we're going to create the walls that will come up out of the box. Now, you may have got your box into a spot where you can't find it. Let's say common problem is you zoom so far in you don't know where you are, and it's going to take forever to zoom out. So you can just hit the home button and this will take you back to a known spot. So home button, something you'll use a lot. So we need to do a new drawing to create these walls. So like we did before, we'll create a sketch, and we can either choose one of these original references, or I can highlight a surface and that will be my reference, and we call these planes. So I want it to build the wall up from this top surface. So I'm going to click on that, and it's put me straight to a top view, but it happens to be upside down. It doesn't really matter. I find it does that a lot. I've never really worked out the why, but it's not a big issue. So we're going to make walls that are also 3mm thick. Now I could draw another box like we did before. I could draw out from the corner to corner. That would be fine, but there's an easier way. So hit escape to unselect that. There's a tool called project. Now, most of these common tools have a shortcut key, so P is for project, but I'll try to use the mouse so you can see what I'm doing. What project does is allows you to select things from a previous drawing. So I'll select that line, that line, that line, and this line. Now I could have also just clicked in the middle, would have selected the whole lot, but just to show you what exactly we're doing, we'll do that. And before I click OK, I'm just going to leave it to check that I have projection link on. Now I'll explain that a bit further after we've done this. So what that's now done, if I hide my body, you can see I've got a box here. This is not the same box that we had before. If I expand these sketches out, sketch 1 was my original drawing that we created. We're now looking at sketch 2. So what this has done is created me an outline where we projected from that original body. Now I could again draw another box at 3mm in, but I'm going to use the offset tool instead. So we'll go offset and I'll just highlight that edge, and it's automatically, because it's a closed surface, it's automatically selected the whole area, and it's by default said 1mm in the outer direction. That's not what I want. I want a box that is 3mm in the inner direction. So if I go -3, enter, it's now created me this new shape here. So again, I'll just hide the background body. So it's created me two boxes effectively, one inside the other. And I'm going to go finish sketch. And if my bodies was back on, I'll toggle these on and off. Normally I'll just leave them on, but just so I can explain as I'm going. And I'll rotate this on an angle so you can see a bit better what's going on. So I've now got some distinct areas that I can click into. So if I go extrude, if I click the middle, it will extrude the middle. So if I click there and pull up, it's going to do the middle part, but that's not what we want. So I'll escape, select the outer part, and I'll pull that up. And I'm just going to put a random number because it doesn't have to be exactly the same as the other box. So let's call this a 15mm high box. We're going to leave it as join, and I will go OK. And you'll now see that I have a box that's sealed on all but the top that I can completely rotate around. So just a very quick recap on those first points, which are fundamental to everything else we'll be doing. We have on the timeline down here the 4 steps we've done. So I can either move the timeline backwards and we'll see the different steps, or I can just double click on a step and it will take me into that. So finish sketch, if I look at this one here, we'll get the change. So I could say, all right, I don't want that to be 3mm, I want that one to be 2mm, and OK. So my box still looks much the same, but you'll find that if I measured this height, originally we had 15mm plus the 3mm base. If I now measure this particular line here, so it's now 17mm because we've got the 15mm where we raise the side plus the 2mm. So things can dynamically change. Other things that we can dynamically change, I'm just going back into the first drawing. Because I defined these numbers in here, this means we've constrained it. So we've got up the top here a whole heap of things called constraints. A constraint locks something. So I've locked a dimension, but I also happen to have a constraint here, whereas if I hover the middle, you'll see I've got all these little things. And what they show me is that that is constrained to a point, so a coincident constraint. So I have constrained these center points to the center here. You can also see I have some parallel constraints. So this line is parallel to this line, and this line is parallel to this line. And then these ones here, this one shows that it's a horizontal constraint, and we may have a, no, we don't have a vertical. So we can constrain it in all different ways. And as we get more and more complex, you'll use different versions of these. It's very important that you constrain your starting point, whether it be to the center point, or you might constrain this corner here to the XY0. But locking that down as a starting point will stop a lot of pain as you go further through the sketch. Okay, so I've decided I've built some of my box, but I don't like the size. I want it to be 80mm long. So I can just jump in here now and type in 80 and hit return. My drawing will physically stretch out, and if I go finish sketch, my box is now, if I use the measuring tool on that edge, an 80mm box. The reason that all of these sides here followed was because in this step we did, see if I can get into it, doesn't want to let me, we did this projection link. It's not easy to see here, there is an icon for it if I go in at the right level. But anyway, because we projected these, I'm just going to repeat the process to show what I mean. So if I project this outer frame, we did that projection link. It's the link that means that everything will change based on any changes below. So the fact that I changed my box to being 80mm long, the projection link made all of these other changes follow. So now that we have our basic shape, what I would like to do is look at how to define some references so that we can put some mounting holes in the back here. So if we jump over to our other example and I turn that around, you'll see if I move along on the timeline, we have these holes. So we're going to learn how to put those holes in the right spot. So going back into the previous sketch for this one, you'll see that I have these dotted lines. So these are construction lines, and then I have some measurements around them that lock those construction lines into different points. So we're just going to look at how to do that. So we're going to do another sketch on this plane on the inside of the box. Now I could go click on create sketch and then click that, or I can also right click and go create sketch. So first thing I'll do here is go for this particular tool, which is the line tool. If I also just press L, it'll bring this one up. Now if I just drew a line by clicking 2 points and hit escape, I'll get a solid line. For the purpose of what I'm doing, I actually want a construction line. Now I can change that to construction by selecting it and clicking on this here, and it'll become dotted, or just delete it and start again. I go line tool, line type is now construction, and any line I do from this point forward until I change will now be a construction line. So just looking at my view of my layout again, I want to know that let's say the back of it, no, sorry, the left of it. We'll say the left of it is going to be where we have the mounting holes closest to. So working from that view, what I'm going to do is just draw a line at a random point sort of close to it, and the only thing I want to make sure is, just tab over to it, that the angle is 90 degrees. So where that angle is, I'm just going to type in 90. And the length is not critical so long as it is around the length of the box. We're just going to go for a random at the moment, so I'll hit enter on that. It's locked in a length in this case for me, and we'll probably change that, or we may not need it at all. So I'm just going to draw a couple of lines the same like that, just to make life easier. I'll square it up, which will make my 90 degrees easier to draw. You'll see if I just hover, it will just snap to that 90 degree point. So I'll draw 2 that way, escape, whoops, wrong one, that one, and another 2 this way. If after I've clicked the second point of a line, it doesn't join another line, it will continue and try and draw more lines. So just hitting escape or return will end that at that point. Okay. Again, to make it a little bit easier to see, I'm going to hide my bodies. And you can see I've now got myself some construction lines here. I want to make these a specific distance away from edges. So using this tool here, this is the dimension tool, I can select any of the lines. So in this case, we'll go with that one and measure to the edge that I want it to be defined from. And your final click will just place where the numbers are, and you can have the numbers on the outside or the middle. So I'll click that there, and I'm now going to type in that I want that exactly 10 millimeters. So the next line I want to be another, we'll say 5 millimeters from the first. So I'm going to click from one line to the next and put a new dimension in there. Actually, I won't make it 5 because that will mean my holes will be tiny. So let's go for 12, just for something random. So what is happening here is because I've done this one first, it's constrained that line to this point here, and then this line is now constrained to this one by the dimensions. Doing the same with these lines, I might also want them to be 12 mil apart. So I'm typing 12 and enter. But you can now see I have a problem that they're not central, and I want them central to the box. So what we can do there is use one of our constraint tools. And the one I'm going to use is the Symmetry tool. So Symmetry basically means that two lines will be placed at equal distance around a surrounding or around a center point. So I'll select my two lines, so that one and that one. It's important that you select the outer lines first, and I want them on this red center line. Now I can't click on that, but if I come over here, and it will be my X, so you can see the blue appears as I hover that. Click on that. That has now made them that they'll always be at equal distance across with 12 millimeters between them. The next step is to create the actual hole that we want. So I can select my circle tool, and like with the square tool, there's various different ones that we can use. In this case, I'll be using place the center and then do the radius. So I will place the center here, and as I draw it out, you'll see it will grow, but we can define what we want. So I want this to be a 4 millimeter hole, and enter. Now you'll notice that it's a dotted line. In this case, because I'm going to be using this to modify the actual body, I don't want it to be dotted. So I'm just going to click on that and unclick construction line. So doing another circle, at the moment it's still enabled to be a construction line, so I will turn that off, click my circle and go out to my 4 mil and enter, and I now have two circles. Now I can go through and do that for each of these points here, and that would be fine. It's only a handful of points, but there's a better way of doing it. So again, if we start to change things, we will get auto update. So I'm just going to undo that last one. So I'll Control Z. And I'll come down to here to rectangular pattern. And what this asks is, what objects do I want to create a pattern of? So I want it to be this circle, and then we get a whole heap of other choices. So we can either fill things in here or do them visually. And I find visually it's nice and easy. So I can drag that out to the point that I want. And in this case, it's 12 mil. I didn't actually need these crosshairs for what I'm doing, but it was just another part of the example. And I can extend that across that way. Now you can see that I have a lot more holes than I wanted. So I can change my quantity in both directions to 2. And that will make it that if I make a change to the first hole, double click on the distance, if I make that a 3 mil hole, all of them automatically update. So it makes it quick and easy to update things that should all be the same. So we're going to finish on that one. And again, if we rotate, it's just a bunch of drawings. You may have noticed as we're going through, after we've used the drawing by extruding it, it makes it non-visible. So at the moment this is visible because we haven't used it for an extrusion. So I'm going to click that extrude button, and I mentioned before that we can select multiple areas. I could select the back and not the holes, and if I was to extrude that in a downward direction, you'll see that it cuts out everything except for those holes there. But we don't want that one, so let's just clear my selection. What we want are the 4 holes. So 1, 2, 3, 4. And because I'd already pulled down, it's remembered that. But you can also, from this list where we previously had new body, we used join last time, I just didn't show it, but we've got cut and join are the two majors we'll be using for the rest of this. So a cut will cut a hole, whereas if it came up, you'll see it's changed to a join and it will create pillars. We want it to be a cut, and we can specify the distance. So we could say that it needs to be -3 millimeters, so -3, and that will take it just to the bottom there. Well, I changed that to 2 before, so this is a good time to look at a different feature. So instead of distance, I can say to object. So which object do I want it to cut down to? The bottom plane. So that is now exactly on the bottom plane. So where I thought it was 3, I can just click on that. It'll be 2, and it will always follow that. So I'll click OK. And we now have holes in our box. And you'll see that this has now become non-visible. So in this video, we've learned how to create a basic shape of a box using extrusions and cuts. And we're going to move in the next one into how to make that look a little bit nicer by adding fillets and chamfers around the edge, and how to use offset planes to create surfaces that are not directly connected to one of the other surfaces, such as the front or the back. So if you haven't already done so, please do subscribe and follow the link for the next video, which should be out very soon.